Hello, it's the 15th of June. Welcome along to Renew Every Morning. I'm so glad you're with me again. And today we're going to take a verse from Colossians chapter 1 and verse 11. And our thought today is about being strengthened. And so here's our text. Be strengthened with all power, not some, by the way, all power, according to his glorious might, so that you may have what? Great endurance and patience. Well, I think this is a very interesting insight into the way of the divine, because here we're seeing that Paul is saying that we need power not to perform, but power to endure. And now that's an interesting thing, because in a world that seems to value speed and show and all that good stuff, this is something very different. This is a kind of radical reversal. What we're hearing here is this simple prayer that is asking for endurance, for faith. And of course, Romans chapter 5, remember that hope produces endurance, and that endurance doesn't disappoint. So now we're thinking about the divine supply and the human need. And here we have these two verses that hold these deep, deep truths together. Be strengthened with all power, says the apostle. Why? So that you may have great endurance and patience. Now, note the fruit of power isn't dominance, it's durability, it's sustainability, it's longevity. That's actually very important. And Paul is the one that I really do identify, him and John, particularly with the superconscious life, but it applies to all of us. But Paul is, as F.F. Bruce so beautifully described in one of his biographies, the apostle of the heart set free. He's a man awakened to what we call the superconscious. In other words, he has a clarity of spirit that transcends the ego and perceives the world through divine union. And when you and I can do that, we can perceive everything through divine union. Everything makes sense to us. Now, because of that seeing, he knows that the real thing we need is endurance and patience. And by the way, 1 Corinthians 13:4, love is patience. So he lived in stillness, but yet without passivity. He has awareness, but without effort, does Paul, because he's super conscious. He has love without conditions and strength without any need to strive. Now, for me, what's interesting is there's a kind of parallel parable that I wanted to think about, which is the antitype, which is the story of Samson, because Samson misunderstands his strength. He thinks strength was his gift, and the gift was in his hair and his calling. That's what his thinking is. He was wrong, frankly. His strength, of course, evidenced itself that way. But what he learned was when he treated the divine power as a personal possession, it kind of left him, and it was a real issue for him. And his strength returned not in pride, but in prayer is where it comes back. Now, do you remember the prayer he makes in the middle of all of that, the temple of Dagon, when he's brought out and mocked, and he's lived this amazing life? Remember, he's judged imperiously for a long period of time, but then he has that moment of falling. You know the story with Delilah, and he gets the Philistines are upon me, the Philistines are upon me, and he has that whole story with that. But eventually he has his hair cut, he loses his strength, and then what he goes is he moved from this giant to being someone who's just eyeless in Gaza, and there he is, and he's in the temple, and there he is taken out to be mocked at on the great day of mockery in Dagon's temple. And he finds this moment of exquisite recommission, of exquisite grace, where he says, Sovereign Lord, just strengthen me once more, just once more. And the flow of grace comes bubbling up into him. And this story is wonderful because, he pushes out and all the pillars of the temple come down, and down comes the whole Baal worship regime. But the real story to be had here is patience comes through grace, not through grit. Patience is the first fruit of love, isn't it? That's the thing. Endurance is the child of faith, and power is the presence of Christ in you. It's not forced, it's just a flow. Now, the question that I was interested in when I went back to this text was, why doesn't patience produce power? Well, that's a good question, but in God's economy, power isn't the reward, it's the root. You see what I mean? Now, you could think in other worlds it's the reward, but it isn't. Here it's the root. We're strengthened into patience and into endurance, not because we're strong, but because we're held. And this is rather nice. So I've got a kind of prayer practice that I was thinking about for this particular talk today. It's the breath of endurance. So I'm going to invite you just to join with me. And just on your in-breath, Just breathe in and pray slowly on the in-breath. Strengthen me, Lord. And on the out-breath, according to your glorious might. And just repeat, 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 and let yourself relax into that. And let that prayer carry you into a very quiet sense of dependence. So today's renewing thought is very simple. You don't have to be strong, you only have to be strengthened. God's grace isn't just the starting line, it's the stamina. It's the thing that gives you the endurance. So, you're not hoping in vain, my friends, and may you be renewed and encouraged in that. So, bless you today. Thank you for being with me, and I look forward to being with you again tomorrow. All right, bye-bye for now.